Greetings, this is Bradford Donald Keller Townsend, and this is a forward research report, the 15th of November, 2018 of the Common Era. The topic of this discussion or lecture is the Third World War, debunked. As a thrice-knighted Illuminati Grand Master Knight, have been or are privileged to the highest levels of information, that the pinnacle, the very peak of that silly pyramid where those British guys with blonde wigs are pointing. The very tippity top of that pyramid, I'm privileged to that level of information. Like I'm little guy sitting on top of the Illuminati power elite pyramid. And I can tell you that China, Russia, the United States are all cozy pals. We work together on high-tech satellite, computer networks, vital, key life and death infrastructure. We know how the Chinese infrastructure is put together. We could cyber attack them or do some other kind of dastardly deed that messes up China, that messes up Russia, and they have the power of mutually assured destruction, not just in thermonuclear, ballistic, intercontinental missiles, but in all kinds of technologies such as machine language in computers and machinery. When you have a piece of machinery, whether it be a combine harvester, as a specific example, there are integrated circuits. These circuits use what's called machine language that people who study computer engineering are the expertise. Electrical engineers and software engineers have some knowledge, but the people that are really what at Indiana University, Purdue University, which is what I know, and their terminology, the computer engineering majors know the machine. They program the actual chips, and there's more than one type or language that goes into making integrated circuit chips. And then what you're using when you are on your computer is just the interface computer language icon clicking mode. Below that, there's several other languages and operations that are going on, such as compilers. You may be familiar with the term operating system, but there's compilers and other types of software that they typically don't teach you that even exists in high school or even a beginning college course in computer science. They leave that out. So there's a lot of languages going on and coding that's going on at the machine level, where you have to actually type into a keyboard, instructions, and then also they have to be written in diagram form type language, and then actually made into physical chips, physical on and off switches of silicon. So that's so each side, all the sides have engineers, because thousands of Russians go to school in the United States and work in the United States. Tens of thousands of Chinese work in sensitive areas of our manufacturing, and we helped or enabled the Japanese to go through this rapid industrialization of the last 40 years. And in doing that, we were spying on them too, I'm sure, and gave them the technology because they couldn't have advanced as fast if they would have had to reinvent everything for themselves. So all three major powers in the world are, and they're the only reason I name those specific countries is they all have over a 1 million uh, people in professional active duty, at this time in uniform. Um, where there's no country in Europe, let's say Germany or France or any of those old powers, Italy, or even Turkey, that have the magnitude and the quality of equipment and the capacity to manufacture their own complete set of weapons. Even China really can't manufacture their weapons without lots of help from Russia and the United States. And we train and sustain the Chinese military, the United States, and we also help Russia uh, with their military and their technology. So these three powers all want to have strong militaries for good reasons. And to have a credible threat, they kind of like it's like really more like an intercollegiate boxing. Let's say you're at the Virginia Military Institute or the Naval Academy, and they're broken into companies like Foxtrot Company, Echo Company, and let's say you're in Foxtrot Company, and they're going to have an inter college boxing tournament. So they break them up. So maybe one female from Foxtrot Company and three males will box against uh, three males and the one female from Echo Company, just as sport intramural boxing with the where they wear the headgear and the great big uh, cushiony gloves, just as an activity. Um, and it's something to train for and give a goal to your workouts instead of just jogging and doing push-ups. If you know you're going to have to get in the ring with somebody and box, you might do an extra sets of push-ups or run an extra mile or two, or run faster, that kind of thing, as you want to get fit for that little boxing tournament. And it kind of gives you prestige amongst respect amongst your peers in your company by being able to step forward and um, punch and get punched and everything. So that's the analogy. China, Russia, United States use each other as sparring partners, but they don't really intend on doing any serious damage other than a split lip or a little cut over the eye. They're going to cut things off and um, ramp down the violence if they're killing too many. Even if people are actually getting killed, they try not to even kill a single person of each other. Pretty much, like in Syria, um, they coordinate their artillery, which is your cannon shells. They can shoot for miles, and they have to take it into account the wind currents that change directions as you go up, let's say, into the jet stream and back down again. Or there might be different. The wind might even be in different directions in the miles that the shell has to, the big um, component that weighs 100+ kilos that's going to hit and detonate into a building where you think the enemy headquarters is. So you're shooting a bunch of cannon shells at that building or that city block, and hoping of taking out the leadership of that, or at least rattling them, you know, by having large explosions land in their city block. So that's, but they don't want to kill each other. If they know there's Russians in there helping the Iranians and the Syrian forces, they don't really want to kill any Russians. Um, they don't want their airplanes in the same airspace where they could be tempted to shoot at each other. So they try to coordinate it all so that the NATO helpers to the Americans, which is that's really all they are. Like in the Roman times, you had auxiliary troops from recently conquered areas that weren't quite trusted yet to be full Roman legionaries. They would be like cavalry or slingers or archers or scouts. Um, so that's kind of what NATO is to the United States. They're just supplementary specialists, and they've even come out and said that. Like the Dutch say, "Oh yeah, we'll have an elite unit that'll be your scouting troops for your paratroopers and that kind of thing, or your expeditionary forces. We'll have an elite spy, scouting squads that can go out, just a few of them that can go out and ahead and gather information, because we're too small of a military really even to give you a regiment of quality paratroopers or expeditionary force troops. So that's what the situation is. You have the United States, you have NATO, and some other countries like Australia that are just supplementary specialist forces, and then you have China, which is substantial. India is substantial. Russia is substantial, but India and China don't have the military-industrial complexes like Russia and the United States do to have a completely arm and equip themselves with high technology and quality weaponry. They rely on the fundamental research and engineering of the Russians and the Americans and their platforms and equipment. And by doing that, they leave themselves vulnerable, the Indians and the Chinese, because the people who engineered the basic structures of their weapon systems probably know where the vulnerabilities are of the things that they made. So the likelihood of World War III with all this weapons of mass destruction, and they keep getting to be more weapons. Like when I was a young man, cyber attacking wasn't going to do as much damage as it did today. Everything is so dependent on computers and software that hackers can do even more damage than nuclear warfare can do. Probably more people would die from a well-done cyber attack than would die from a nuclear thermo exchange or conventional bombing of planes and rockets to each other's countries. If you could shut down all the pumps to the water systems, most people don't store water. So in 3 or 4 days, especially in hot places like the southwest United States in the summertime, if you shut down the water, people are going to be dying in just a few days of thirst. You shut down the traffic lights, you shut down the water, you shut down the electricity grid. Just shutting down like the traffic lights would cause, some deaths and some mayhem, even if you kept the rest of the power grid on. So as the complexity of modern civilization gets greater, the weaknesses to breaking that chain and causing serious problems to each other's civilizations. So it's so easy because all the countries are so fragile and combustible. I just don't think major powers are going to go, because once they do, that means their electricity grids are probably going to be taken down, and their water and all their utilities will get taken down. That'll affect their entire populations, and then they have to worry about insurrections amongst their own people and desertions of their own troops trying to leave to go take care of their families. So it's just not going to happen. So do not lose any sleep over World War III. We could get hit by a meteor. We could have a solar flare that takes out our power grid. There could be a pandemic, virus that spreads. There are things to be scared of. I think it's a low probability, under 1 in 1,000, that there will be a World War III, unless there's just some insane people who want to bring down civilization and cause the war. But other than that, the probabilities are very low. But the probability is with certitude. If 1 is you're certain, 0 is that it's not going to happen. It's 0.9 or higher that mechanical industrial civilization is coming to an end, because we don't have the minerals and the metals to make machinery. Without machinery, you don't have electricity, and you don't have food, you don't have civilization as we know it. So we're in the grand transition from mechanical industrial civilization toward one that's based on wind power, biomass, and muscle power. So that's, burning logs or wood chips, which will probably be split wood because, wood chippers, how are you going to power your wood chipper if there's no fossil fuels? So you'll have to physically, do what Abraham Lincoln did as a young man and take wood and chop it and then put it onto a chopping block and cut it down and then put it into your Franklin, a more high-tech Franklin-like stove, and heat a portion of your house with firewood, or old grass that you burn in there or something. That's what I mean by biomass. And then wind, of course, we'll still be able to have sailing boats, and we'll still have windmills to generate some electricity for a while and to use for pumps and that type of thing. And then muscle and human labor will be big, and that instead of using combines to harvest our food, people will have small plot gardens and have to bend over and physically harvest, the crops by hand, as there won't be any way to power machinery to do that work. So at least a 40-fold increase, could be as much as 80-fold increase in the amount of people working in agriculture. Pretty much everybody needs to have a garden and grow a portion of their own food themselves and then barter their goods and services and the food products they produce to get the ones that they can't produce themselves. So that's my talk about the reality club view of World War III and the current status here in the world. On the planet Earth, going over 490,000 miles an hour around the great attractor of the Milky Way galaxy. Cheerio.